We're on page 119, and we're going up to page 122 at the end of this section in Harada Roshi's book, The Essence of Zen. So I feel particularly close to this material at the moment because
What page are we on, Ado?
119.
Thank you.
So I feel very close to this material right now because Harada Roshi received his certification of his enlightenment from Gien Inoue Roshi, and just this very day we sent out for proof of the book. And so Gien Roshi has a very similar approach to his teaching in terms of stepping aside from the ego and going straight to the realization that Dogen Zenji brings us to. So that is the next book that we are going to take up, and I think you'll begin to feel very familiar with it, actually, with Gien Roshi's approach to practice. And in the preface to the book, Daigaku Rume, who is the translator of the book, says that this approach to Zen has been lost in many, many of the streams in Soto Zen. And so it simply isn't taught. It simply isn't mentioned. And so it's particularly appropriate, I think, and important that we bring Gien Roshi's book forward and that we be studying Harada Roshi's book also for the similarities of their teaching. And I think, given the condition of the earth that we are in, the urgency to truly take up this teaching and to examine it extremely closely. So right then in the beginning, he's asking, so what do we refer to the way? To explain this, I would like to mention the following. Being is conceived in the womb. Becoming a person takes place in the world. Seeing is done with the eyes. Hearing is done with ears. Smelling is done with the nose. Speaking is done with the mouth. Carrying is done with the hands. Walking is done with the feet. That is what is called Buddha nature. Pretty simple. And of course, he tells us that this is, as Bodhidharma spoke, that this is what Buddha nature is. Here we are just again. Those skandhas, those activities that are simply activities. So another teacher, Gien Roshi's son, Kando Roshi, is yet another very awakened teacher. Teaches in the same vein. He taught at Ensuji when I was there. And so he would say that the body does the functions, that the eyes are part of the body and the body sees. And that's all there is to it. He just says the body does the functions. So when we are trying to work out this question of the mind with the function of the bodies, we are inclined to think that the mind observes the world, or my mind is seeing the trees outside or seeing the cushions before me. He says the body is what observes. So the eyes observe. The mouth speaks, ears hear. And it is that simple, but it's not easy. And when I think about how do you get to that moment in which you allow that to happen, you allow the body to see, is an extremely subtle moment in which we simply, as best we can, enter the body itself and allow the eyes to do the function of eyes. We allow the ears to hear the function of ears. So the eyes observe the world, the ears observe the world, tasting observes taste. And that's all there is to it. It is not more complicated than that. It is not more complicated. But it certainly requires us to allow that subtle shift to take place as we sit with that claim that Kondo Roshi makes, that the body observes. The body does the observation. So it's extremely subtle and incredibly simple, and truly requires that we sit very quietly with it and allow that realization that when we look at something, the eyes are doing the observing, not the mind. But the mind is the eyes. The mind is not separate. But we don't have to use our mind, which would be perception, to suggest what it is we are looking at. We will realize. It isn't that we won't know. We will know. We will know. So then a little bit further down in the book, he quotes the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, move on with the light in the Dharma, light of the Dharma. This is the light of yourself. Proceed with it and don't look elsewhere. End quotes. That was his instruction to his disciples at the end of his life. So the functions of the ability of the body to engage in these functions is the Buddha Dharma. It is Buddha nature. That is the Buddha, and that is the light about which Harada Roshi is speaking.
Edo-san, may I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
So the image of the eyes just is simply seeing the tree or the rock or the sun, I'm just wondering if you would say anything about when the perception, where all the doors of perception are open at once and even being sort of flooded with all kind, like with the waves of stimuli and response and reaction. It all gets very busy sometimes, and I'm just wondering. I guess it's still all the same. It's still just as simple.
Well, our training is to face the wall so that we don't engage in a great deal of stimuli from everything around us. And this is our practice, to face the wall so that we are able to attend, to be able to observe how the mind is working, how the body works. So that is our practice. If you want to know what this realization is, and this is an experience I'm talking about. This is not just, it's not an intellectual issue. It's an experience. Face the wall and practice it so that there isn't all of the stimuli that comes in for everything. I will admit at the same time, I think on the day of my birthday, those of you who are here tonight and who came to sit, I think there was a great phenomenon that happened outside, nevertheless, that there was something extraordinary about everything being so wide and so tremendously open that it was impossible to particularly notice any one thing. So in one sense, when we sat outside, there was that same phenomena that it was too much to consider any one thing. And so there was this symphony of birds that we sat with in the center of nature, all surrounded by trees and sky. And the totality of nature simply sort of functioned in that same kind of way. But for mostly, we need to face the wall because we aren't adept at being able to truly experience the eyes as the observer. The eyes are observing, not perception. So that's how I can answer, is to face the wall. Oh, further down in that paragraph, it means, of course, as we are following the Buddha's teaching, we practice each thing and each activity for its own sake. If we are polishing our shoes, we are simply polishing our shoes for that sake, because that's what we're doing. We're polishing shoes, or we're sweeping the floor, or whatever it is we are doing. We do it for the sake of itself, just for the sake of the activity itself. And there is no special significance attached to anything. That's it, we just do that. There's no special thing of, oh, I am doing this good deed, sweeping the floor now, and I'm wonderful because I'm polishing the silver, or nothing like that. That's all. We just do that. Just polish the silver. Just dust the altar. And there's no special thing about it. It's just that practice of that activity. That's simple. And, it may be that we find that too bland and we prefer to have some kind of excitement around the things that we are doing. And that's definitely not what we get from Harada Roshi. In the simplicity and the ease. I mean, this is the true leisure in the Dharma, in which we are unobstructed because of the intrusion of the ego in daily life. It's unobstructed. So there's nothing extraordinary going on. We aren't making anything special. We aren't making ourselves special. It's just this. Simply this activity. And it's extraordinarily liberating at the same time. So, and Zazen is Zazen is, I think Harada Roshi is famous for saying that. Zazen is Zazen. Nothing else. It's just Zazen is Zazen. So, any questions around on that part? This this little opening listing, it's really important. It's really important. It's incredibly simple and really important. So I'd encourage us all to, when we are sitting zazen, to work with that, to work with the ears. The ears of the body, the ears are observing the world, the eyes are observing, not anything else. And when we are in that experience of that, there's very little thinking that goes on. I know we all worry about thinking, but the object is not to try to stop thinking. It's not what we are doing. We're not worrying about that. But when we engage with that opening and that realization, that experience, that that the eyes and the body observes, really not me thinking. It's maybe I could maybe also say the entry to samadhi. So then he asks us in the next to bottom then, in 120, awakening to the chaos within you. He gives us this little a story of konton, which is the Japanese word for chaos or confusion, konton. And so he gives us these people who got together and they thought that konton needed some, holes in his head, eyes and ears and nose and what have you. And so they started drilling on this, and they did it until this, whatever it was that they were drilling into, till they found that he was dead. And then the very next point, he says, these men had, by meddling with something, destroyed its very nature. So konton was simply the nature of something that was I don't want to say undefiled, it was unmarked, let's call it, unmarked, and thought, well, that doesn't look so good. Let's drill some holes in it and let's make some marks on it and do something. And once again, by doing that, they did so much that they destroyed its very nature. So this is this is also extremely important. Every paragraph we get to in Harada Roshi is such a profound paragraph of lesson. And so there is this question of our own nature imposing upon recreating the world or meddling in the world in some way to suit something that we feel should be the way we would like to see it. And by doing so, we literally meddle. So some of you here may be artists of one kind or another. So you know what happens. So if you're a painter and you're using oils and you get to the point where you think, that painting's really good, but you know what? If I just paint a little bit more on it, you know immediately that you've ruined it. Any painter knows that. So the ability to stand back and not meddle in what the intuitive mind gave us as the gift of the piece of art teaches us, if we can listen, to not meddle further with our own thinking. Oh, if I just put in a little of this and a little of that. Happens all the time. Happens in flower arranging too, I think, Joan, doesn't it? Although Joan is a very good artist, flower arranging artist. But, if you put in one extra branch, you wreck the whole thing. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, you can over meddle. Definitely over meddle. But I was grappling with that, what he said about meddling with the konton inside ourselves.
Yes.
And I was trying to come up with my own example of that. I was having a hard time about how we meddle with ourselves. So I don't know if anybody has any examples. I'd like to hear that. I mean, other than what you've already said, but just like,
well,
I don't know, anything that comes to mind. I just kind of struggled with that, how we meddle with the konton of ourselves.
Well, we can certainly do that in our relationships, for instance. We can think that we've arrived at some harmony of some kind, and then we start thinking it over and we think, maybe I better go back and say something and do something else in this particular situation. And we do, and we discover ourselves, in a misunderstanding. So we certainly can meddle in that way by outthinking our own selves. not.
What's the difference between meddling in a negative way, like they did with Konton and they killed him,
Right.
and trying to make changes in the world that we think would be positive? I mean, it's because we think they'd be positive. Is that meddling then in an ignorant way? I mean,
I think that Harada Roshi is trying to get us to the point where our activities and our actions would be completely direct and would not be a question of meddling because they would not be ego. I mean, essentially meddling is an ego activity. It's something we want somebody else or something to turn out the way we want it. And if we are able to know ourselves well enough, then we can enter a public sphere without fear that we are acting on our ego. I mean, this is part of the engaged Buddhism world, in which the hope is that the people who are engaging in engaged Buddhism are mature enough to understand that their actions can be very detrimental and can even do a disservice to Buddhism. So Harada Roshi is, I mean, you know, toward the end, he's going to say, it'd be great if we had a few people who could act in the world. He'll, I don't know where that is, but we'll come up upon it. But he says that it'd be really good to have a few people who really understand cause and effect and could act in the world. I think that comes up in this reading.
yeah,
I really like that passage as well.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
And I was thinking about it in the sense, you know, taking Kanton literally in the same way we meddle with the chaos inside of ourselves, right?
Yes.
All of those things, those aspects of ourselves that are not the things that we want, the things that we want to push away or to obscure or run away from, push down. That I see that as a form of meddling. That ultimately, you know, we're meddling with our own Buddha nature in doing that, I think. And rather than just taking all of it as it is.
Just allowing the body to observe.
Right. Perhaps, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Larry.
Thank you. Perhaps the word meddling can help us distinguish. It helps me distinguish between concept of observing versus perceiving. I mean, earlier, Edo-san, you said that the body does the function, the body does the observing.
Mm-hmm.
But previously, as we discussed, Harada tells us that perceptions preclude oneness. Oneness precludes perceptions. Reality is something that cannot be perceived.
Mm-hmm.
So the distinction between simply observing without the ego self is very different than perceiving.
Correct.
Because that involves our mind and our preconceived ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's right. Yeah. So I mean, you know, certainly he's very short in that paragraph, awakening to the chaos within you. You know, he doesn't spend a lot of time on that, and yet that's probably the most time that most of us spend in Zen practice is dealing with the chaotic self, the chaotic world, the chaotic interior world that we live in, or that we ourselves create. Let me say that. We don't need to live in a chaotic world. We create the chaos within, so that, you know, it takes us all kinds of places that we probably, you know, if we thought about it, we really don't want to go. I mean, and chaos is also the hell realms. So where did we read about the hell realms? Do anybody remember where we got that was it the last book that we were reading, or was it in this book where he talks about the various realms? He talks about the hungry ghost and the hell realm and the heaven realm. Does anybody remember where we got that? Mickey?
Yes, it's in this book. I don't remember which chapter it's in.
Yeah, I thought
just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, just a few weeks ago. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I just turned to it. Oh, I just got it. Thank you. Oh, I like that when that happens. I just opened the book to it as you spoke, Mickey. It's on page 100. So he's talking about the realms here, and he's talking about. He's also talking about the fact, I think, that everything changes, and that there's the transmigration through the 6 realms, and we are that this great speed in which all of this happens. So nothing remains fixed, and there is no substance. We are insubstantial, so there's nothing that actually weighs us down to prevent us from the very rapid movement through these realms. And so that's what's also, he says, is that's what's impermanence. And so he's then taking us through these realms, and certainly if we examine these realms, we can find out where we are. By examining the chaos in our own minds, we can certainly look and see it, if that's where we wish to dwell. And I don't think most of us want to be there at all. But with pain and suffering, it's easy to fall into hell. And he says, beneath the world of human beings is the realm of hell. Life in this realm is the exact opposite of heaven. Every aspect of this life is a cause of suffering. Due to the excess of pain and suffering, the opportunity for a being in hell to encounter the Buddha Dharma does not exist. So we probably have those experiences in which, we fall into hell and we don't quite climb up, and it's not so easy to climb out of it once we discover ourselves in any of these realms that are rather uncomfortable and so hard to climb out of. And yet, if we can look at our own chaos, if we can examine it, we can see we are on the precipice of that edging over into the abyss, and then having to climb out of it. He is trying to save us from this kind of difficulty in our life. But I'm amazed at how little time he spends on it, given some other subjects that he takes up. But meddling is a good word to remind ourselves about whether we are engaging in that meddling that ultimately gets us nowhere. So,
Edo-san, would Konton be kind of a personification of simply the skandhas co-arising dependently?
Sure.
In concert with everything as it is. So not necessarily hellish, but or enlightened, but just the way it is. And we bring hell or enlightenment based on our practice, our willingness to let it all be and not meddle.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, kind of, not interfering in, don't interfere with the function, meddling or interference, yeah, yep. So, I mean, it's the conditions that we find ourselves in that, right now is our condition, and we are in our condition, And in the next paragraphs, he's going to be talking about that cause and effect, because certainly if we meddle, the potential for the cause and effect situation will continue. And so certainly we are certainly the condition right now. We're the result of all of the conditions that have come before. And so he is saying also, I think on the next page I underlined that, and if your present condition is not so desirable, then you must quickly try to change the cause. So we can look in our own interior and examine the causes that we are causing, as it were. I mean, we are causing whatever difficulties, with the meddling. So
I think is it the meddling that is the cause itself?
Well, it could be, I suppose. What do you think? Do you think that that's true? Do you think that's it?
Well, I think that when we're, I think we're constantly meddling. I think anytime that we're not present to our actual experience, direct experience, and fully present, I think we're meddling. And I think that when we're meddling in that way, when we're not complete, when we're not whole in that way, then we can't access our wisdom mind to make the decisions to act appropriately. So in realizing that we're meddling means that we're seeing and accepting the condition as it is, which creates the opportunity to make a different choice in that moment.
Correct. Right. And we talked about karma in I don't think so much in this book, but we did when we were talking about mountains and waters. And there were certainly some views of karma that say we collect and then we bear the burden of the collection of what we have done. But in the Japanese Buddhist notion of karma, we are like a train going along a track, and we are free to change that track in whatever direction we choose at any given moment. And to the degree that we act without perception, to the degree that we allow the functions of the skandhas simply to be, we do not collect karma. So that also means then that we don't bring about conditions that cause us some suffering as we go forward, or some difficult continuous condition that we simply don't want to be in. An undesirable, he calls it a desirable, it's not desirable, an undesirable condition. And we can change that at any given moment. Do we have the presence of mind, the presence to be able to shift when we discover ourselves in this, this stumbling? And do we have the presence to be able to look at it and say, not going that way? I mean, that's what he's asking us to consider here. The principle of cause and effect does not allow the interference of the ego self. So essentially, I mean, that needs to be opened up a little bit. The principle of cause and effect does not allow the interference of the ego self. So essentially, so he says, if only one or two people, here it is, who really understand the law of cause and effect came forward, it would help to point the world in a good direction. This is urgently required. So here is the question then of going forth in the world. If we are a bodhisattva who can fully understand cause and effect, and who can truly understand the non-ego function of pure cause and effect. To be a pure cause in the world, to be a pure Buddha cause in the world, is to not collect karma and to have a great effect upon the world also.